Alrighty guys, so today we will be covering the decks that give me a hard time. The decks that when I see them I want to vomit, I get pissed off, I feel like scooping before the duel even starts. These are the decks that really hurt my Apocalypse deck. And it took me a while to want to release this video because I was like, I don't want to tell my subscribers my weakness, because I duel most of my subscribers on Dueling Network. I don't really duel random people because my subs are always asking me for duels and I'm always giving them advice. And some of them use these decks and I kind of giving away some of my secrets, but who cares? So without wasting any more time, let's get straight into the decks that cause me a pain in the ass. The biggest pain in the ass you can think about. Wobbles. Good old Wobbles are annoying. Partially because of Laval Lakeside Lady. I set a lot of cards. And I'll tell you guys, one of the biggest weaknesses with my deck is decks that can pop without having to attack. Because of that, Laval Lakeside Lady and basically the whole Laval engine is very hard for me to stop. Because although my deck can stop OTKs very easily, it makes me minus myself a lot. And when Lavals use multiple rekindlings over the course of a duel, which they have because they always use gold sarcophagus to get the rekindlings early, and then they can naturally have the rekindling anyways, it makes it very, very hard for me to stay alive because I'm minusing myself excessively to stop cards that are going to come back anyways if you kill them with rekindling. So, Laval Lakeside Lady, because she pops, because they can spam a lot of monsters, and then when they spam monsters, I kill some of them, but if I kill some, they're just going to spam with rekindling again, is the reason why this deck's a big problem. Now, the reason why this is the least of the worst matchups is only because of Soul Release, because I usually side in Soul Release, if not always side in Soul Release against this deck, and it's a fairly effective card, but I'm not always going to draw it, so that's one of the reasons why Lavals causes me problems. Now, gotta be honest with you, I am glad that nobody runs this deck. I'm so glad because there's so many decks on Dueling Network, there's so many decks on Yu-Gi-Oh! Pro that cause me problems that I'm glad nobody runs them because they don't think they're competitive. But to me, they're one of the worst things that can happen. Wats are a huge problem for me. Number one, they're weak monsters, and they like to manipulate the level limit area B card. They like to manipulate cards that stop stronger cards from attacking them. Because of that, it's a problem, because I don't really have many cards that are lower than level 4 that can attack, and the cards that do are usually defensive cards. So when I'm going up against Wats, keep in mind that I have to use a lot of trap cards, and in some builds I run 8 to 10 traps. On almost every build it's 8 to 10 traps, some 11 to 12 traps, some maybe even 6 or 7 traps. I keep experimenting, and traps are the only things I can use to stop Lavals, and eventually they run out, and eventually they keep just spamming more Lavals. On top of that, they can attack me directly, which is the main problem why Wats killed my deck, because my deck works when monsters attack my monster. Wats do not attack my monsters at all. So my Snowmans, my Night Assailants, my DD Warrior Ladies are sitting there useless. And then on top of that, when I use my cards to attack them, they're using stall cards to stop me from attacking them anyways. And because of that, it makes it an extremely hard matchup for me to beat Wats. Now, I know Thunder King starts Cobra, but Cobra's only one card. Overall, Wats are a huge problem for my deck. Moving on to Infernals. Now, I gotta be honest here. I am extremely glad that Infernals get almost no play, because I think Infernals are probably a tier 2 deck. They're a pretty good deck in my opinion, but the thing is that most people don't know how to build it. You see, Infernity Barrier is one of the most annoying cards that can happen in my deck, because my deck doesn't like trap cards either, because I only have a certain amount of offensive cards. Offensive meaning Bull Blader, DD Warrior Lady, Thunder King, ID, Gores, all of that. But basically, once you kill my offensive beat sticks, and there's only a couple, I'm in a big problem. Because the other cards require my cards to die. Like, ID doesn't just come out. You have to kill something of mine for it to come out. And Infernities like to stall for an excessive amount of time until they have no cards and then they just OTK you. That's how this deck plays. My deck isn't fast enough to wipe out Infernities fast. And see, the thing is that people are always saying that the reason why Infernities aren't tier 1 is because they're too slow. You see, the meta's too fast paced and the meta would usually kill them off. But see, my deck doesn't have that meta attacking capabilities. And it would if I drew BLS, but I never draw them, and that's another story. So, because I don't have the power and the speed to keep up with Infernities, I can't beat them. And that's one of the reasons why I struggled with this deck. And I don't duel this deck very often, but whenever I do, I almost always lose. And I think it's worth mentioning here. Now, swaps, or frogs, sorry. Frogs are pretty annoying to duel against. One of the main reasons is because they have what I consider an unlimited life force. They don't die. It doesn't matter what you do to them, they're gonna keep coming back and back and back. You banish those fucking frogs. They use Sea Lancer. You know, you kill the frog, it goes to the graveyard. On top of that, then they have Ronin Totem that has 2,000 defense, and now I have to wait for a stronger monster to get over that. Or now I have to minus myself to get over a Ronin Totem that's going to come back anyways when you send them to the graveyard. Their unlimited life force is one of the main reasons why this card's a problem. Caius is a popping card, that's another problem. But the main problem for me is not Obelisk the Tormentor. It is fucking Light and Darkness Dragon. That card is basically the epitome of my deck's downfall. It makes me minus myself 4 times to get it to a point where I can even kill it. And on top of that, I'm not always going to have a beat stick that can run it over. My deck is not that strong, and it's not easy for my deck to bring out strong cards. So, because of that, it makes me minus myself to get it weak enough for a Thunder King or a Bull Blader to run it over. And then when I run it over, they special summon a frog. That isn't good for a deck that doesn't plus that much. My deck is all about being rock solid. You see, other decks, it doesn't matter if they have a bad card here or there because they draw so much. My deck always has to have good hands, and I made my deck and I organized my deck in a way that it's extremely consistent. It's very hard for me to get bad draws. And frogs make me minus myself so much for no reason because they're just going to come back anyways. And because of that, frogs are a huge threat to my deck. I know this for sure because a good friend of mine, Sean Harris, who I mentioned before, he uses them and he just mops the floor with me. Now moving on to Mermails. This deck is a problem. This deck is the epitome of a popping deck. This deck just spams, and on top of that, stupid Mermail Abyssland is one of the most annoying cards ever because it doesn't matter what you do with it. You know, I have to banish her with DD War Lady. I have to kill her somehow. You know, they always set her first, and the thing is that when she dies, you're always going to summon the 2400 beater. Then I have to find a way to kill him. And then it's not just that, but then this deck works with Atlanteans. They keep sending the Atlanteans to the grave to pop my cards, to pop a set card. And last time I checked, I'm always setting. So it's a big problem for me to beat this deck. At first I thought it wasn't that bad, but the more I duel this deck, the more I realize this deck has a huge advantage over mine, and it's extremely difficult to beat. Moving on to Fire Kings. Good lord. If you go on Dueling Network, this is the only deck you're going to find. I hate this deck. It's annoying because the only thing you can do is bottomless DD Crow. Like I said, my deck doesn't like popping cards. This is the epitome of a popping card. It comes on the field and it destroys all of my shit. And on top of that, they have Sacred Phoenix Nepistus, which comes on the field and blows up all of my back rows. And then if I use my traps to blow up these cards, they're going to come back anyway, so it doesn't even matter. This deck is insanely difficult for me to beat. I mean, if I don't have Soul Release or DD Crow, I'm screwed. And on top of that, once I kill these cards, I still have to deal with their other cards to stop. Which is why it's so hard. I have to deal with an already good deck with broken monsters. Too hard for me to beat. Now guys, you know this for sure. I one time made a 25-minute video rant on how much I hated this fucking deck. And I'm not gonna lie to you, I still fucking hate this deck. This is the second most difficult deck for me to beat. Yes, I am aware that they got hit by the ban list, but I cannot beat Inzectors for whatever it is I side against them. I beat them a lot more often than I used to. In the old days, it was like just scoop first turn. But now it's just hard because Inzectors plus so much. I don't always have the resources to stop them. I need certain cards to beat them. And I never draw my good cards when I play Inzectors. It's just the truth. I don't beat them. Their Hornet is probably the biggest nightmare for my deck. Hornet is officially my deck's biggest nightmare. When I see him, I want to scoop. Unless I have a Veiler. Because when Hornet comes, he just wrecks my deck a new asshole. He pops my back rows. He pops my front rows. He just pops my whole field into oblivion. And then they just exceed summon and no TK me. I can't stop this deck. The only thing I can do is I can side in DD Crow, maybe on a Hornet, which they'll get back with Tour Guide. And then I Soul Release them, which is a pretty good effective card, but they can always get that back. This deck is really hard to beat, specifically because of how Hornet literally takes that little needle in the picture and just rips my deck to pieces. Just rips it to complete pieces. I can't stop Hornet. I can stop other cards, but without Hornet, this deck is very beatable. With Hornet and Dragonfly that brings out the Hornet, or with the Centipede that adds the Hornet to the hand, this deck is always going to be a nightmare until this card is banned, which will never happen. So, all of these years and all of these months that I've been like thinking maybe I can beat Inzectors, I realize I still beat them every now and then, but it's just too hard. Especially when they side in Dimensional Fissure and make my Veilers useless. Then I have to wait to get the freaking Breaker and the MSTs. It's just too hard to beat this deck. I can side against it, but it's still too hard. The whole deck engine is hard to beat. And that's Inzectors for you guys. Moving on to the last one. Gravekeepers have been holding me back from winning so many local tournaments that I can think of. I've lost 4 local tournaments. I could have probably have topped in first place in 4 local tournaments because of Gravekeepers. I won the last locals. The last locals I won about 3 or 4 weeks ago was because I didn't even play this deck. This deck is too hard to beat. Number one, it's mainly because of the fact that they have a lot of defensive cards. So if they have that Gravekeeper spot with the 2000 defense, sorry about this guys, give me 1 second. Sorry about that guys, I timed out. So as I was saying, basically one of the problems is that their spy causes them to search Descendant, which is a popping card, but not just that. Gravekeepers are too strong and defensive. They're not an offensive deck at all. They stop me from using certain cards, I'm aware of that, like Monster Reborn, BLS Chaos Sorcerer. But they're too strong because of that 500 point boost, so I can't fight any of their monsters head to head. So every monster I fight is going to have to basically sacrifice their life to kill this deck. This is the reason why this deck is the hardest to beat. I use all of my monsters to kill these guys. They keep coming back because they have an unlimited amount of resources. I kill a card. If Thunder King doesn't kill the stupid recruiter, you know, then they get their search. They keep getting pluses for no reason. And on top of that, they have a million trap cards. So I have to deal with traps, I have to deal with monsters with too much of a high defense, and then I have to deal with monsters that are too strong to fight conventionally. So I have to waste a lot of resources trying to stop this deck. And then on top of that, this deck is the reason why I even use Close Forest. this deck is just too hard for me to beat, I give up on trying to beat him. I'm going to try my best to beat him. I'm not saying I'm not going to play them to my heart's content in a tournament, but I've given up trying to find a way to make my deck able to beat this deck. And that's all, guys. Please rate, comment, subscribe. Thank you for watching this nice long video. Sorry for the brief intermission, and have a nice night, because it is currently 10:49 p.m. See you later, guys.